In a galaxy ruled by cruelty and control, mercy was a forgotten word. The Vorthan Empire came bearing a gift, not of honor but of suffering. A dying creature discarded and broken. Yet on that day one human refused to look away. She didn't see a weapon. She didn't see a monster. She saw life, worth saving, worth fighting for. This is the story of the unwanted gift. The diplomatic hall of the human station felt too quiet. Commander Rick Hartley stood near the viewport, watching Earth spin slowly in the distance below. He'd been expecting this meeting for weeks, ever since word came down that the Vorthan Empire wanted to discuss trade agreements. What he hadn't expected was what they were about to hand him. The Vorthan delegates entered the chamber like a cold breeze. They were tall, angular beings with skin that shifted between silver and gray depending on the light. Their leader, a figure who went by the designation Prime Kess, moved forward with an ornate metal case floating beside him on some kind of invisible field. Rick's gut told him something was off. The Vorthans didn't do favors. They didn't do gifts. Everything they did had a sharp edge to it. Commander Hartley, Prime Kess began, his voice carrying that strange harmonic quality all Vorthans had. We come bearing a gesture of our esteem for the human delegation. A token of the bond we hope to forge between our peoples. Rick nodded politely, though his military training kept him alert. He'd dealt with enough alien species to know that pretty words usually meant complicated problems. The case descended slowly, and Kess gestured toward it like a magician revealing a trick. The metal pod's front panel became transparent, revealing what was inside. It was a creature unlike anything Rick had seen before. The being was massive, easily the size of a horse, maybe bigger. Its body was covered in scales that shimmered between deep purple and blue, like oil on water. 6 legs, each one thick and powerful, lay folded beneath its bulk. But what caught Rick's attention most was the head. It had feline features, a long snout with delicate whiskers, pointed ears, and eyes that should have been fierce and wild. Instead, those eyes were dull, lifeless, sick. The creature's breathing was shallow. Rick could see its ribs moving slowly, as if even the effort of staying alive was becoming too much. There were scars running along its flanks, some old and healed, others still bearing the marks of recent wounds. Whatever this thing was, it had been through hell. This is a Kethran beast, Prime Kess continued, his tone suggesting this should mean something profound. One of the rarest creatures in the known galaxy. Highly prized. Extremely valuable. We gift it to you as a symbol of our respect for humanity's place among the stars. Rick felt the weight of the moment. Every officer in the room was watching him. This was politics. Accept the gift and you're saying yes to whatever alliance the Vorthans wanted. Refuse it and you're insulting one of the most powerful empires in known space. But there was something else too. Something about the creature's condition that bothered him on a level that had nothing to do with diplomacy. Before Rick could respond, Dr. Patricia Webb stepped forward. She was the expedition's chief biologist and probably the most brilliant person on the station. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing and a way of moving through situations with a quiet confidence that made people listen to her. She stood next to the pod, studying the creature with an intensity that suggested she was seeing something in it that everyone else was missing. "It's dying," Patricia said simply. Her voice wasn't accusatory, just factual. "This creature is critically ill. Whatever this is, it's suffering." Prime Kess made a sound that might have been a laugh. "The Kethran beast is ancient in years and fragile in health. We have attempted all remedies known to Vorthan science. It refuses to recover. We thought perhaps human physicians might appreciate the challenge. Or, if not, you could observe its decline and learn from the biological data. Either way, it seemed a fitting gift for a species still learning its place in the galaxy." Rick heard the real message underneath those words. The Vorthans were basically saying, "Here's a problem we couldn't solve, so we're getting rid of it and we're calling it a gift so you can't complain." It was insulting and practical at the same time, which was very much the Vorthan style. Patricia leaned closer to the pod, her hand pressing against the transparent surface. The creature's head turned slightly toward her, though its eyes didn't really focus. There was almost no response, just a minimal acknowledgement that something had moved nearby. "I'll take it," Patricia said, still looking at the beast. "I'll take responsibility for it." Rick opened his mouth to tell her absolutely not, to tell her this was obviously some kind of trap or test. But then he looked at her face and he saw something in her expression that stopped him cold. It was the same look he'd seen in people his entire life when they encountered something broken and decided, against all logic, that they could fix it. It was hope. It was stubbornness. It was that particular human quality that made no sense from an evolutionary standpoint but somehow kept the species going anyway. He thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Fine, Rick said. Dr. Webb, the creature is your responsibility now. Get it to the medical bay and do whatever you think you need to do. Patricia didn't sleep for the first 36 hours. She sat in the medical bay with the creature. Vex, she'd started calling it, though she wasn't sure why, running every diagnostic tool available to the human station. Blood work, neural scans, tissue samples, genetic analysis. The results all told the same story. The Vorthons were right. This creature was dying. Its nervous system was shutting down piece by piece. Whatever was wrong with it, human medicine didn't have an obvious answer. But something didn't add up. The creature's physical degradation didn't match up perfectly with what the scans were showing. Patricia had been studying alien biology for over a decade, and she'd learned one crucial thing. The body always tells a story if you know how to read it. Scars told stories. Muscle atrophy told stories. The way an animal held itself, the tension in its frame, the position of its limbs, it all meant something. Vex was lying completely still, one massive leg folded beneath its body at an angle that had to be uncomfortable. Its breathing was shallow but steady, like it was trying to take up as little space as possible. Its eyes, those dull blue eyes, were half closed. And whenever Patricia made sudden movements or loud noises, the creature's entire body went rigid. Its muscles tensed. Sometimes it made a low hissing sound deep in its throat. That was when Patricia started to understand. She was sitting at her workstation around midnight on the second day, staring at neural scans that showed degradation in the pain centers of Vex's brain, when it clicked. The scans weren't showing disease. They were showing trauma. The neural pathways associated with fear and stress had been overactivated so many times that they'd actually changed. Rewired. This creature's brain had literally been shaped by prolonged fear and pain. The Vorthons hadn't been treating a sick animal. They'd been keeping a prisoner. Patricia spent the next hour reviewing the creature's medical history, what little the Vorthons had provided. There were notes about conditioning sessions and behavioral modification. Translation: they'd been torturing this creature and calling it treatment. The neurological failure the Vorthons described wasn't a disease. It was what happened to a mind and body that had been pushed too far past their breaking points. Patricia made a decision right then. She got up from her workstation and approached the containment pod where Vex lay. The creature's eyes snapped open. Its body tensed immediately, ready for pain, ready for whatever was coming next. Patricia could see the fear in those eyes, ancient and deep and bone-crushing. She stopped moving. She sat down on the floor, slowly, about 10 feet away from the pod. She didn't make any sudden gestures. She didn't speak loud. She just sat there and waited. "Hey," she said quietly, barely above a whisper. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Vex's breathing remained fast and shallow. The creature's eyes stayed fixed on Patricia, tracking every micro-movement she made. There was no trust there. Just calculation. Just the grim assessment of a creature trying to survive. Patricia kept talking, her voice low and steady. She told Vex about Earth. About forests and oceans. About how her own cat used to sleep in the sun and purr when she scratched behind its ears. She talked about music and why she loved it. She talked about nothing important, really, just the gentle stream of words from a human being who wasn't angry and wasn't trying to control or hurt. She talked until her voice got tired, and then she kept talking anyway. She did this every day for the first week. She'd come in and sit near the pod for hours, sometimes talking, sometimes just being present. She started bringing music, soft, ambient pieces with no sharp edges or sudden crescendos. Classical stuff mostly. The kind of music that sounded like it was trying to be kind. By day 5, Vex stopped hissing whenever Patricia moved. By day 7, the creature's breathing started to slow when she entered the room, as if her presence was becoming familiar. Still not safe, not exactly, but familiar. Recognizable. Patricia also changed how she moved around the medical bay. No sudden gestures. No loud equipment. She kept the lights soft and warm instead of the harsh clinical white that usually characterized human medical facilities. She brought real furniture into the space. Comfortable chairs, plants, things that felt like life instead of sterility. On the 10th day, Patricia was standing near the pod when Vex did something unexpected. The creature's massive head turned toward her. Its eyes, those same dull, traumatized eyes, made contact with hers. And for just a second, Patricia saw something flicker in there. Not trust yet. Not hope. But a question. A wondering. A tiny, fragile possibility that maybe this soft-voiced human wasn't like the others. Patricia didn't move. She just held that gaze and kept her voice gentle. "I know," she whispered. "I know what they did to you. But that's over now. I'm here." Vex's breathing slowed. The creature's head lowered slightly, resting on its folded legs. It was still afraid. It was still broken. But for the first time since arriving at the human station, the Kethran beast had stopped trying to die. It had started, impossibly, to wait. Patricia was reviewing neural scans at 3 in the morning when it happened. She'd been staring at the same data for weeks, looking for patterns, looking for anything that might suggest a way forward. The rest of the station had stopped asking about Vex. The general consensus was that the creature would die, Patricia would learn something from observing its decline, and life would move on. It was the practical, logical conclusion. Patricia hated it. She was so focused on the screens that she almost missed it. A small spike in motor cortex activity. Tiny. Insignificant to most people. But Patricia had been studying Vex's neural patterns long enough to recognize what she was seeing. The creature's brain was waking up in places it had been dormant. She rushed to the medical bay. Vex was still lying in the same position it had held for weeks, but something was different. The creature's front left leg was extended slightly further than usual. Not much. Maybe an inch. But it was there. Patricia's hands shook as she pulled up the live neural imaging. The motor cortex was lighting up like a city at night. Vex wasn't just lying there. Vex was trying to move. The paralysis wasn't a dead nerve. It was a terrified mind refusing to let the body obey. The creature had learned, through weeks of pain and control, that moving meant pain. That obeying meant suffering. So it had simply stopped trying. But 3 weeks of Patricia's gentle presence, her soft voice, her consistent care without any punishment or pressure, that was changing something fundamental. The creature's brain was beginning to believe that moving might not result in agony. Patricia spent the next 2 days rethinking everything. She consulted every scrap of data she had about trauma recovery in Earth animals, about neuroscience, about rehabilitation. She spoke with the station's psychologist, Dr. Kevin Torres, who specialized in PTSD in human populations. He told her something that stuck with her. Trauma doesn't live in the body. It lives in the mind. The body forgets pain. The mind never does. Until you convince it to. Patricia developed what she started calling the awakening protocol. It wasn't complicated, which was maybe the point. Complicated would have meant more machinery, more intervention, more of the clinical detachment that Vex had learned to associate with suffering. She started with gentle electrical stimulation, not painful, just enough to remind Vex's muscles that they existed. She paired this with music. Soft classical pieces, the same ones she'd been playing for weeks. Vex's brain was learning to associate those sounds with safety. Adding the stimulation while the music played seemed to create a positive association. Movement without pain. Sensation without suffering. But the real breakthrough came when Patricia stopped treating Vex like a project and started treating it like a patient. A real patient. A being that mattered. She began taking Vex outside. The medical bay had a connecting corridor that led to the station's observation dome. A massive transparent section of the hull that looked out into space. Patricia had never thought about it as therapeutic before. It was just a space people walk through. But when she carefully guided Vex's massive frame through that corridor and into the dome, she saw the creature's entire body shift. The tension eased slightly. The breathing became less rapid. Vex was looking at the stars. Patricia had programmed the dome systems to display Earth, Mars, and several other celestial bodies in their actual positions relative to the station. It wasn't real, not exactly, it was an augmented reality overlay, but it was close enough to feel true. Vex stood there, all 6 legs beneath it now, trembling slightly, and just looked. Patricia sat down next to the creature. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, 2 beings from different worlds, watching the infinite dark together. After that day, Vex started to change. Within 48 hours, the creature was moving voluntarily. Not much, slow, careful steps like someone learning to walk after a long illness. But movement. Real, intentional, chosen movement. Patricia watched as Vex took its first steps without coaxing, without stimulation, just because its mind had finally decided it was safe to try. She implemented the environmental enrichment program she'd been planning. She brought in textured surfaces for Vex to walk on. Different temperatures. Different sounds beyond the harsh mechanics of the station. She played recordings of wind and rain and ocean waves, sounds of a living world, not a prison. She brought in objects of different shapes and textures for Vex to investigate with its sensitive snout and whiskers. By day 21 of the protocol, Vex was walking the corridors. By day 28 it was running. Patricia would never forget the first time she saw the creature move at full speed. Vex's massive form glided through the corridor with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. 6 legs moving in perfect synchronization. muscles rippling beneath those shimmering scales. And when Vex reached Patricia, the creature slowed and pressed its large head gently against her chest, making a sound that Patricia's ears heard as a purr but her heart understood as gratitude. The creature that had arrived as a dying gift from an empire that saw it as disposable was now alive. Not just breathing. Alive. Moving with purpose. Making choices. Being something more than just a body counting down toward death. Patricia ran her hands along Vex's neck, feeling the strength returning to that magnificent frame, and she realized something that would change everything. The Vorthons hadn't just tortured a creature. They'd tortured proof of something they'd forgotten how to do. They'd forgotten how to heal. They'd forgotten how to believe in recovery. They'd forgotten how to see potential in something broken. But Patricia hadn't. And that difference was about to ripple across the galaxy in ways no one could have predicted. The message came through official channels at 0600 hours. Commander Rick Hartley read it 3 times, hoping somehow the words would change. They didn't. The Vorthon Empire was demanding the return of the Kethran beast. Immediately. No negotiation. No discussion. The creature was classified as Vorthon property, and humanity had no legal claim to it. The message was polite on the surface, the way official communications between powerful entities always were, but underneath was an ultimatum wrapped in velvet. Send back the creature or face trade sanctions. Face the possibility of the Vorthons making certain the rest of the galactic community knew that humans couldn't be trusted to respect property rights. Rick called Patricia into his office. She arrived with her arms full of data tablets and a look on her face that suggested she'd been expecting this. They want Vex back, Rick said, not bothering with preamble. I know, Patricia replied. I saw the message. It was logged on the general network about an hour ago. Rick rubbed his face. He was caught between his loyalty to his crew and the pressure coming from Earth's government. Politicians back home were already sending their own messages, carefully worded, but the meaning was clear. Don't upset the Vorthons. Earth was still relatively new to interstellar politics. They couldn't afford to make enemies of an empire this powerful. What do you want me to do? Rick asked, though he already knew what she was going to say. Don't give them Vex, Patricia said simply. Let me present my findings. Let me show them what we've discovered. They're not going to listen to a presentation, Patricia. They own the creature according to galactic law. Then let's change what the law means, Patricia said. She leaned forward, and Rick saw the same determination in her eyes that he'd seen when she'd volunteered to take the dying creature. Vex isn't property anymore, Rick. Vex is a person. And a person has rights. The meeting was scheduled for 72 hours later in the diplomatic hall. The Vorthon delegation arrived with a show of force. Not weapons, nothing that crude, but a deliberate demonstration of their power. Prime Kess was there, along with a full contingent of Vorthon officials and, most ominously, a team of handlers in tactical gear. They'd come to collect their property, and they'd come prepared to do it by force if necessary. Rick stood beside Patricia as she set up her presentation. Her hands were steady, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. This wasn't just about saving an animal anymore. This was about making a statement to one of the most powerful forces in known space. Patricia began by showing the medical scans. The degradation in Vex's neural pathways. The signs of prolonged trauma and torture. The Vorthons shifted uncomfortably, but Prime Kess remained unmoved. Then Patricia showed the recovery data. She had videos of Vex's first movements. The creature's hesitant steps in the observation dome, looking out at the stars. The moment it had taken its first full run down the corridor. And then she showed something else. Footage of Vex responding to Patricia's voice, to her presence, with an affection and intelligence that no one could deny. This creature is not sick, Patricia said, her voice steady and clear. This creature was traumatized. And more importantly, this creature has demonstrated intelligence, emotional capacity, and the ability to make choices. According to Galactic Convention 7.3, any being capable of independent thought and emotional response is classified as sentient. Sentient beings have protected status. Sentient beings cannot be property. A murmur rippled through the Vorthon delegation. Prime Kess made a gesture that silenced them immediately. The creature was conditioned by us, Prime Kess said coldly. Any attachment it shows to Dr. Webb is merely programming. Then explain this, Patricia replied. She activated the next video. It showed the Vorthon handlers, the ones now present in the diplomatic hall, attempting to command Vex. They gave orders in the harsh Vorthon language, the same commands that should have been hardwired into the creature through weeks of conditioning. Vex refused them. The creature stood in the corridor, all 6 legs planted firmly, and simply would not obey. The handlers repeated the commands, louder, more forceful. Vex's ears flattened, and the creature turned away entirely, ignoring them. Then Patricia entered the frame. She said just one word in English, "Here." Vex turned immediately and walked to Patricia, pressing its massive head against her chest and making that distinctive purring sound. The diplomatic hall went completely silent. If this were mere conditioning, Patricia continued, the creature would still respond to its original handlers. The fact that Vex recognizes the difference between punishment and care, between control and choice, proves this is not programming. This is a conscious decision made by a sentient being. Prime Kess stood. His angular frame seemed to grow even taller, more imposing. You understand what you are suggesting, Dr. Webb? You are claiming that an animal, a creature bred for subjugation, has somehow achieved consciousness through your intervention. I'm suggesting that consciousness was always there, Patricia said, and her voice didn't waver. You just never looked for it. You trained it out of fear instead of nurturing it toward something better. You broke its will. I helped it heal. And now you're seeing what happens when a sentient being isn't just a tool or a weapon or property. You're seeing what happens when something broken gets treated with kindness instead of force. Rick saw it then. Something in Prime Kess's expression shifted. Just for a moment. A crack in the perfect alien composure. The Vorthan leader looked at Vex. Really looked at it. And for the first time, Rick wondered if Vex was looking back, asking a silent question. What are you going to choose? The chamber held its breath. The Vorthan leadership's decision came through exactly 72 hours after the presentation. Prime Kess delivered it personally, which in itself was shocking. A leader of his status didn't usually involve himself in such matters. He appeared in the diplomatic hall with a small entourage, and Rick noticed something different in his bearing. Not defeat exactly. More like someone who'd been looking at something his whole life and had suddenly seen it clearly for the first time. The Kethran beast is yours, Prime Kess said simply. We relinquish all claim. By Galactic Convention 7.3, the creature is classified as sentient. It will be afforded all protections due to such beings. Patricia didn't celebrate. She just nodded, understanding the weight of what had just happened. Rick watched her reach down and scratch behind Vex's ears. The creature's eyes closed in contentment, and that purring sound filled the diplomatic hall, a sound that suddenly meant something profound. What none of them expected was what would happen next. Within 48 hours, the news had spread across every communication channel in known space. A human had done something the Vorthans couldn't do. A human had taken a creature that an empire of warriors and scientists had written off as disposable and had brought it back to life. Not just physically, but spiritually, emotionally, completely. The messages started coming in almost immediately. The first was from the Krell Collective, a species known for their efficiency and pragmatism. They were questioning their own practices with engineered creatures. Creatures they'd modified for specific tasks, stripped of unnecessary emotional capacity to make them more obedient. Now they were wondering what those creatures might have become if someone had tried healing instead of controlling. Then the Shinali reached out. They were an ancient species, one of the oldest in known space, and they'd maintained vast reserves of exotic animals for research purposes. The conditions weren't cruel exactly, but they were clinical, sterile. The Shinali scientists had never considered that their subjects might respond to something other than proper nutrition and adequate space. Within a week, delegations from 7 different alien civilizations were requesting access to Patricia's research. Her protocols, her methods. They wanted to understand how she'd done it. How she'd seen past the trauma and the conditioning to the being underneath. Patricia granted access to everything. She didn't hold back. She showed them the neural scans, the recovery timelines, the behavioral observations. But most importantly, she showed them the videos of Vex. Not as evidence or proof, but as invitation. An invitation to see what was possible when you chose compassion over control. Rick watched as his small medical bay became a gathering place for some of the most brilliant minds in the galaxy. They came to study Vex, but they left changed. Something about being in the presence of that creature, seeing how it moved with confidence now, watching how it interacted with Patricia with obvious affection and choice, shifted something in them. It was harder to see other beings as just tools and specimens when you'd witnessed what genuine recovery looked like. A month after the Vorthan decision, the first formal proposal came through the Galactic Council. It was from an unexpected source, the Krell Collective. They were proposing a new classification for engineered and domesticated creatures. A classification that would grant certain protections based on demonstrated consciousness and emotional capacity. The proposal cited Patricia's work with Vex as the foundation. It didn't pass immediately. There was resistance. Powerful interests depended on the ability to treat creatures as property. But the proposal was on the table. The conversation had started. And once conversations like this started in galactic politics, they rarely stopped. Rick found Patricia one evening in the observation dome, sitting next to Vex. The creature was looking out at the stars, its massive form relaxed and content. Patricia was reading something on a data tablet, but she looked up when Rick entered. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Fine," Patricia said. "Better than fine, actually. I've had 3 more requests from other species asking if I can help them develop similar rehabilitation programs. There's a Donovan research facility that wants to implement trauma recovery protocols for their study subjects. And the Shinali are talking about converting one of their reserves into a sanctuary instead of a research facility." Rick sat down beside her. Vex turned its head and pressed it gently against his shoulder. The creature had become comfortable with him over the weeks, though Patricia was clearly the one it had bonded with most deeply. "You've changed things," Rick said quietly. "You realize that, right?" Patricia looked at him with a slight smile. "I didn't do anything special. I just treated a creature like it mattered." "That's exactly the point," Rick said. "That's not something most species do naturally anymore. Somewhere along their development they lost that. The ability to see potential in something broken. The willingness to invest time and care in something that can't immediately give you anything back. The capacity to love things others have thrown away." He gestured at Vex, who had returned to looking out at the stars. "This creature was supposed to die," Rick continued. "The Vorthans were ready to let it go. They'd already decided it was a waste of resources. But you saw something different. You saw a being worth saving. And now that's rippling through the galaxy. Other species are starting to see it too." Patricia didn't respond immediately. She just watched Vex, her hand resting gently on the creature's neck. "You know what the most surprising part is?" Patricia finally said. "I didn't do any of this because I thought it would change anything galactic or political. I did it because Vex was suffering. That's all. I saw something hurting and I wanted to help. That's the only difference between humans and the rest of the galaxy right now." Rick realized she was right. While other species had been optimizing, perfecting, controlling, humans had been holding on to something older and simpler. The instinct to care. The drive to heal. The stubborn belief that broken things could become whole again if you just showed them enough gentleness. Earth had always wondered where its place was among the stars. What humans had to offer that other civilizations didn't already have. The answer wasn't advanced weapons or superior technology. It was compassion. It was the willingness to see worth in the worthless, hope in the hopeless, and life in the dying. Over the following months, the changes accelerated. Species that had kept creatures in controlled environments for millennia began reevaluating their practices. Some resistance factions within various galactic governments pushed back hard. There were significant economic interests involved in the old ways. But the shift had begun and it couldn't be stopped. Patricia was offered positions by governments and research institutions across known space. She declined them all. She stayed at the human station with Vex, continuing her work with the creatures that other species brought to her for rehabilitation. Word of her success spread, and soon the station had become something unprecedented, a sanctuary where broken beings came to heal. Vex became a symbol, not just of one creature's recovery but of humanity's potential. Images of the massive Kethran beast walking peacefully through the corridors beside Patricia were transmitted across the galaxy. They became iconic. Young beings from multiple species saw those images and began asking questions about compassion, about healing, about the possibilities that existed beyond control and conditioning. Rick watched it all unfold from his command chair, and he understood something fundamental about his species. Humans weren't the strongest. They weren't the smartest. They weren't the most advanced technologically or the most ruthless in competition. But they had something the galaxy had lost: the capacity to look at something broken and see not a problem to be discarded, but a potential to be unlocked. That capacity was about to change everything. The girl who'd stepped forward to take responsibility for a dying creature had just shifted the moral compass of known space. And she'd done it not through force or politics, but through simple, consistent human kindness. In the end, that turned out to be the most powerful thing of all. From compassion came defiance. From defiance came change. One act of kindness echoed across the stars, proving that humanity's greatest power has never been its weapons, but its heart. If this story moved you, if you believe in what humanity can be, subscribe and join us again. 4 more stories of courage, compassion, and the human spirit among the stars. Milky Way.